He's just an electrician. My father said it like he was excusing a stain on the tablecloth. Not cruel, not quiet, just matter of fact. The way a man talks when he's been telling the same story so long he no longer hears himself tell it. 12 people seated at that table. White candles. The kind of birthday dinner where someone arranged fresh dahlias, and nobody touched the bread, and his voice landing in the middle of all of it, like a dropped fork. I was 3 steps behind him when he said it. I kept walking, took my seat at the far end of the long table, near the window that looked out over the golf course. September dark came fast in central Ohio. The fairways had gone the color of old pewter, and a groundskeeper's cart moved slowly across the 9th hole, with its headlights on. I watched it for a moment, put my jacket on the back of the chair, looked at the room. Hartfield Country Club's private dining wings smelled like money maintained quietly, cedar and carpet and something floral from the centerpieces. The baby grand in the corner had fresh roses on top of it. 30 guests circled my father the way people circle someone they want something from, which in this case was proximity to the version of himself he performed at events like this. Alton Townsend, 60 years old tonight. Former VP of marketing at a regional brokerage, a man with strong opinions about everything and the voice to deliver them without being interrupted. I'd driven 4 hours from Pittsburgh to stand in this room. I'd done it for my mother, mostly, and for my sister Addie, a little, and for the part of me that still believed, against the accumulated weight of evidence, that one of these family gatherings might land differently than the last. I'd told myself I was past the point where anything my father said could get under my skin. The drive back was going to be honest about that. Before I go further, I want to know you're here. Drop something in the comments, just say listening, or tell me where you're watching from. These stories reach places I never expect, and knowing you're out there means something. Subscribe too if you want to keep walking with me through stories like this, where silence ends up louder than everything that came before it. My name is Remy, and this is the night the story my father had been telling about me finally met the one I'd actually been living. My sister Addie arrived with her fiancé Griffith 15 minutes after I did. She'd texted me from the parking lot, "Be nice," as if I were the variable she needed to manage. I understood it. That's how middle children learn to survive, by becoming the diplomat between forces that have never agreed to negotiate. Griffith developed commercial real estate out of Columbus. My father loved saying those words. Real estate developer. He said it the way men of a certain generation say surgeon, with a pause after, to let the weight settle. He'd mentioned Griffith's latest project in the short north, at least once during every phone call since spring. Griffith shook my hand when he found me near the window, quick and firm, and then his eyes moved over my shoulder and stopped. I turned to look. The wall beside the emergency exit had a decorative sconce mounted on it, and half hidden beneath the sconce. You'd never notice unless you were looking or unless you worked in a trade where your eyes found these things automatically, was a laminated maintenance card. Small, white-edged, attached with 2 screws. Emergency transfer switch, quarterly inspection record. Below that a logo in navy and white. Vantage Power Systems. My company. I stood looking at it longer than made sense. Vantage handled close to 40 commercial accounts across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Hospitals, data centers, manufacturing plants with redundancy requirements. I didn't track every installation the way I had in the beginning, when there were only 3 of us, and I could recite the panel configuration on every project from memory. Somewhere in our pipeline, Hartfield Country Club had come through. Somewhere in our commercial division, we'd done the transfer switch and signed the maintenance contract and moved on. My father had planned his 60th birthday party at a venue that ran on my equipment. He didn't know that was the thing. He genuinely hadn't known. I looked back at Griffith. He was still reading the card. "Small world," he said, mostly to himself. "Dinner's starting," I said. I found my seat at the end of the table. The wine was poured. The soup course arrived. My mother Sylvia appeared at my elbow before the first bowl was finished, touching my shoulder, the way she'd touched things since I was a boy. Lightly, carefully, as if she'd long ago decided that gentleness was the only language that worked in the space between my father and me. "I'm glad you made it," she said. "I told you I would." She smoothed a fold in the tablecloth that didn't need smoothing. "Your father's been looking forward to having everyone together." I let her say it. Some corrections cost more than they're worth. Across the table, two of my father's former colleagues were talking about a hospital expansion in Dublin, the new cardiac wing, large project. I'd heard about it through a distributor contact months ago, submitted a bid in the spring, the kind of bid that takes 6 weeks to assemble and another 6 to stop second guessing. We'd sent it in, waited, eventually stopped waiting. We hadn't heard back. I watched the candle in the centerpiece burn and listened to my father work the head table from 40 feet away. Volume up, hands moving, the easy warmth of a man who has never once doubted that people want to hear what he has to say. He was telling a golf story. He was always telling a golf story. The table laughed on cue. That's when the facilities director found me. He came through a side door from the service corridor, wearing a Hartfield polo and the composed efficiency of someone who runs things so that other people don't have to think about them. He scanned the room, located my face, and walked directly over. He crouched beside my chair so the conversation would stay between us. "Mr. Remy?" He kept his voice low. "I'm the facilities director here. I recognized your name on the guest list and wanted to introduce myself." He put out his hand and I shook it. "The emergency power system your team installed last October has been exceptional. In February, we had a grid event. The whole east side of the county lost power for 40 minutes. This building never blinked. The transfer was seamless. Our guests didn't even notice anything was wrong." "That's the goal," I said. "We're adding a banquet wing next spring. I'd love to talk about extending the contract." He set a business card on the table beside my plate, quiet as placing a chess piece. "No pressure tonight. I just wanted you to know someone noticed." He nodded once and went back the way he'd come. I looked at the card, centered it beside my fork, picked up my wine glass, and took a slow sip. Across the table, the colleague who'd been discussing the Dublin hospital project was looking at me with the particular expression of a man who has just revised a calculation mid-conversation. He'd been close enough to hear every word. The dining room was not large. I didn't meet his eyes. I looked at the centerpiece instead. But the room had already shifted. Rooms do that. There's a point where information changes the air pressure, and everyone feels it before they can name what's different. It started with Griffith. I watched him lean toward Addie and speak close to her ear. She looked at him, then at me, then back at her plate with an expression that did something complicated. Surprise first, then a quiet frustration, like someone realizing they've been the last person to learn a thing that was never a secret anywhere else. He had his phone angled toward her. She read something on the screen. Down the table, my younger cousin had his phone in his lap under the linen, thumb moving. His girlfriend leaned over. He tilted the screen toward her. My father refilled his wine and kept talking about Pinehurst. I sat at the far end of the table and let the evening move at its own pace. The thing about silence in situations like this is that it doesn't read as weakness to people who know what they're looking at. It reads as exactly what it is, someone who doesn't need the room to confirm what he already knows. By the time the entree plates arrived, the rotation of attention was complete, not dramatic, not announced. Just the steady gravitational shift of a room finding its actual center. 3 more phones had come out. 2 of my father's colleagues were in a quiet conversation I couldn't hear, but I caught the word Pittsburgh, and one of them gestured almost imperceptibly in my direction. My aunt set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not warmth, exactly. Something adjacent to it, reassessment. My father laughed at something. He was still fully inside his version of the room. Griffith came to me after the entree plates cleared. He pulled the chair beside mine out slightly and sat sideways, not joining the table, but positioning himself between me and the room, the way you sit when you need a conversation to stay between 2 people. He was quiet for a moment, the way a careful man is quiet when he's choosing his opening. 12 states, he said. 12 active, I said, expanding into 2 more next quarter. He nodded slowly. I developed a medical complex in Dayton 2 years ago. Kessler Orthopedic. Your company did the backup power infrastructure for that building. I remembered the project. 4th quarter of 2022. Long timeline, excellent site supervisor on our end. Good job on that one, I said. I know it was. I've walked that site 20 times. I just never connected the company name to you. He was quiet again, the kind of quiet that signals something is coming. Addie didn't know. I want you to understand that. I know. He reached into his jacket and took out a piece of paper, folded in thirds, the creases worn, like it had been in his pocket for more than one day. He set it on the table and pressed it flat with his palm. He looked at me once. Then he stood and went back to his seat without another word. I waited until a server passed. Then I unfolded the paper under the table. Email chain. Printed out. At the top, my father's personal address, the recipient. Senior Vice President of Facilities Operations at Dublin General Medical Network. The same hospital system whose bid we'd assembled for 6 weeks and never heard back on. I'm reaching out on a personal basis regarding a vendor bid you may have received from Vantage Power Systems. I have direct knowledge of this company's principal. While capable at smaller scale, he has struggled to manage projects at volume, missed client timelines, disputes with subcontractors. Given our history, I felt it would be remiss not to share this. Happy to discuss further if useful. Below it, the VP's reply, "Thank you. Always appreciate it coming from a trusted source." And then the contract going to a firm in Cleveland. I read it twice. Then I checked the date and scrolled to the bottom of the chain, where there was a second email I'd almost missed. Smaller font. 8 months before we'd submitted a bid. My father had reached out preemptively, not to warn after we'd failed, but to disqualify us before we'd had a chance to show what we could do. He hadn't waited to see if I'd stumble. He'd made sure I would. I folded the paper and put it in my breast pocket. There's a kind of anger that doesn't feel like anger. It feels like clarity, cold, precise, like a line drawn on a blueprint that explains everything that looked like coincidence before. I sat with it for a moment. The candle in the centerpiece burned down another half-inch. My father's voice rose from the head table as he built toward the punchline of whatever story he was telling. I stayed through dessert. I stayed through the toast his old partner gave. Something about legacy and what a man leaves behind. I stayed through the coffee service and the second round of handshakes, and my father standing with his jacket off, completely unaware that the room had quietly been reading a different version of him for the past 40 minutes. I let him finish his evening. I didn't need to interrupt it. I found him in the small anteroom off the main hallway when the party was winding down. He was alone with the last inch of a drink, jacket loosened, the stillness of a man who had performed well tonight and knew it. He looked up when I came in. I took the printout from my pocket and set it on the side table next to his glass. He looked at it. "Read it," I said. He unfolded it slowly. "Read the first few lines." His expression didn't do what I expected. There was no flinch, no collapse of composure. He set it back down with the steadiness of a man who had already decided, before I'd walked in, that he was not going to give me the satisfaction of watching him react. "I was protecting the family," he said. "You wrote that first email before we submitted anything," I said. "There were no missed deadlines, no subcontractor problems. You made it up and sent it to someone who trusted you. You were getting into contracts that. We have infrastructure running in hospital systems across 3 states," I said. "There are people alive right now because our work held during power outages. The building you rented for tonight runs on our equipment. That's not a man who needed to be protected from himself. That's the man you've been telling people doesn't exist." His jaw tightened, a muscle moved below his eye. "I spent 30 years building relationships in this city," he said. "My name is attached to what I recommend. Your name is attached to a lie you told a hospital VP so my bid wouldn't get read." The room was small enough that the silence in it had real weight. "I'm not here asking for an apology," I said. I picked the printout up and put it back in my pocket. "You can keep telling people whatever version of me you've settled on. I drove 4 hours tonight because Addie asked me to, and because I thought you deserved to know that I know." I looked at him one last time. "That's everything I came to say." I walked out. The parking lot was half empty, the golf course dark beyond the lot's edge. I sat in my car for a few minutes with the engine off, not waiting, not replaying anything, just being still in a way I hadn't managed to be all evening. The facilities director's card in my jacket pocket, the printout beside it, the maintenance tag on the wall inside that I would never stop thinking about, my logo on the wall of the room where my father explained me away. I started the car and pointed it toward Pittsburgh. 9 months later, Vantage Power Systems appeared on a regional business journal's list of fastest-growing companies in the tri-state area. I got the notification on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing load calculations for a new hospital wing in Louisville. I read the headline, closed the tab, went back to the numbers. An email from Griffith came that afternoon. 3 active hospital development sites where he was putting us forward for the power infrastructure contracts. He'd already connected me with the facilities teams. 2 conversations were in progress. His message was short: "You run the best shop I've seen at this scale. I want everyone to know that." From a man who built his entire professional life on not saying things he didn't mean, those 2 sentences meant exactly what they cost him to write. Addie texted later that day, "I saw the article. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it out loud. I'm proud of you, Remy." I held my phone for a moment. Then I typed back, "That means more than you know." Because it did. My father didn't reach out. 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, a letter arrived at my office address. Typed envelope, no return address. Inside, one line in his handwriting: "I may have underestimated the scale of what you were building." I read it once, set it on my desk. I sat with it the way you sit with something that is true and incomplete at the same time. He hadn't apologized. He'd acknowledged. I was old enough to know those are not the same thing, and honest enough to admit I didn't know what I would have done with an apology anyway. Some debts don't clear just because someone says the word. I didn't reply. Instead, I called our accountant and finalized something I'd been thinking about since the drive home from Columbus. A small grant program, 4 trade apprenticeships per year, commercial electrical track, open to applicants in the central Ohio area who couldn't cover licensing fees out of pocket. The fund was attached to the company name, not mine. It didn't need my name, it needed the work to be real. The man my father had described in those emails, the one who couldn't manage scale, who missed timelines, who wasn't ready for the contracts he was chasing. I had spent years listening for that man in my own hesitation. In the bids I second-guessed. In the jobs I underpriced because some voice that sounded like authority had said I wasn't worth more. He hadn't just written a lie to a hospital VP. He'd installed it somewhere inside me, and for a long time I'd let it run. Walking out of that anteroom, I wasn't free of everything he'd put there. I won't pretend otherwise. But I stopped giving it the last word. If you've ever been the version of yourself that someone else needed you to stay, the cautionary tale, the disappointment, the one they introduced by explaining you away, I hope this is useful to you, not as a lesson in how to get even, as evidence that the story doesn't belong to whoever talks the loudest. You still get to build the thing. You still get to decide what it stands for. Drop a comment if you made it this far, just your city, or whatever you want to say. I read everyone because stories like this aren't only mine. They belong to anyone who ever decided that the truth was enough of a foundation to build something real on. Subscribe if you want to stay. I'll keep showing up.